So yeah, let's begin with the workshop now. I hope you all have opened Blender and you have this default scene, and you also have this image. Um, you also have this image. This is the reference image that we'll be using, and we'll be using this image to create this render of the champagne glass with champagne and um, some some pieces of cheese. So yeah, we'll be using this photograph as a reference to create that render. So first of all, I, I want you all to download this photograph and save it in a folder. Save it with any name. I've saved it with the name champagne.jpg. You guys download this photograph and save it somewhere. So once you have done that, you can come into Blender and so in Blender you can import photos directly by dragging them and dropping them onto the 3D viewport. So if you do this, the images will be aligned to wherever you are looking at that moment when you drag the image onto the viewport. So if I move my camera around a little bit and then I add a new image, it will be aligned to face the camera at that point. So this is how you can import images easily into Blender. So right now I am going to delete all these images that I have imported, and I want to import the image such that it is parallel to the XZ plane. So if I want to import the image such that it is parallel to the XZ plane, I somehow need to be watching along the Y axis, something like this. So there's an easy way to do that. So if you have a numpad on your keyboard, you can you can just press one on the numpad, and then you will be aligned with the XZ plane. So you will be aligned exactly with the XZ plane. And this is an orthographic view, if you are familiar with the term. If you're not familiar with the term orthographic, then don't sweat about it too much. But if you know what it means, then it's so yeah. This view is an orthographic view. So if we import our image in this view, and then we rotate our camera, we see that it is parallel to the XZ plane and it was dropped onto the x-axis, onto the XZ plane. So now that we have our image aligned, we can go ahead and use this image as reference to model this champagne glass and this cover for the cheese pieces. Right. Also, if you are facing difficulty in, like, if your keyboard doesn't have a numpad and you can't just press one on the keyboard, then you can also try like pressing Alt and then using your middle mouse button, and that way you can snap to these views pretty quickly. So if I press Alt and I use my middle mouse button from right to left, then I snap to the YZ plane, and then if I want to move to the XZ plane, I just move my middle mouse button. I just click and hold and move my mouse from left to right, and I'm back on the XZ plane now. So all the while I've been holding Alt. Let me go ahead and enable the shortcut viewer add-on so you can see what I'm doing. So if I hold Alt and I move my middle mouse button, you see I can snap to these orthographic views along the axes. Okay, so now that we have our image imported, we can go ahead and start modeling on the basis of this image. So let's go ahead and move this image along the y-axis a little bit further back, so that when we model, our model doesn't clip into this image. You'll see what I mean in a minute. So let's go back to our frontal view by pressing 1 on the keyboard. So, does anybody have any problem following along up till now? Like, I hope this was pretty simple. Okay, so yeah, so I guess you were easily able to follow along up till now. Let me go ahead and close this window. Okay, so now we want to model this champagne glass and this cover for the cheese, and we also want to model the cheese. So we'll go into our frontal view, and we want to start modeling the glass from its base. Our strategy while modeling this glass would be to build it from the ground up, and it will be to start with a cross section of the base, and then we will extrude it a little bit, and then we will match it with the glass. We will extrude it a little bit, then we'll match it with the glass, and we'll keep going on. So let's see what I mean by that. I'm sorry. So let's bring our 3D cursor to the center of the champagne glass just by clicking on the champagne glass, and let's uh, press Shift A on our keyboard to bring up the add menu, and in this, from the mesh subsection, we can select circle. So this adds a circle in the XY plane. So if I rotate my camera a little bit, you can see that it has added a circle where the 3D cursor is. Now we don't want the circle to clip into our image, so we'll bring the circle a little bit forward on the y-axis. Let's bring it on the x-axis. We can also select the circle, go into the item tab on the right hand corner near the gizmo, near the movement gizmo, and like and over here we can also change the parameters to move this circle. So let's undo that operation right now, and let's just bring the y to 0. So once you have brought the y to 0, you see that if you look at it from the top, you see that it's right on top of the x-axis. So let's go into our frontal view again, and let's scale down. Let's select our circle, and let's scale it down so that it matches the width of our champagne glass base. So we'll press S and we'll scale it down until it matches the width of our champagne glass base. Now we want to go into, so till now you were just editing it in object mode. Now we will go in edit mode and we'll start extruding it a little bit. So currently you can see that it's just a circle. If you want, so there is no face inside the circle yet. If we want a face inside the circle, we'll have to select all the vertices of the circle, and we'll have to press F. So now we have a circular face. So we'll go back to our frontal view, and we will press E on our keyboard to start the extruding process. Sorry. So once we have pressed E, we see our new face has logged onto our cursor, and we are extruding it a little bit. So let's go ahead and extrude it up till here, up till the point where the bend in the glass is up till the point where the bend of the glass has become smooth and it has become almost cylindrical. So once we have done that, we can press Z and go into the wireframe mode. We can hold Z on the keyboard and we can go into the wireframe mode, and we can see that all these vertices, we can see the image through our object, but we can also see the vertices at the same time. So this is a very helpful mode if you want to model something based on reference, because you can see the reference behind the object. Okay, so So yesterday we were discussing about loop cuts, if you remember. So this will be a perfect time to use that and create and make this object more like what we have in our reference. So you see that if we look at the reference, you see that the base is tapering towards the cylinder, right? It's getting narrower and narrower. So we need more and more geometry in between this face and in between this face so that we can create that tapering pattern. So to add more geometry, we need to add more loop cuts. So how do we do that? We will press Ctrl R on our keyboard, and you can see it has added a tentative loop cut here. I haven't like confirmed the operation yet, but it has added a tentative loop cut. And then we can scroll our mouse wheel up to add more number of loop cuts. So I think 4 is a good number of loop cuts. So I want to confirm this operation. So I'll just press left click. And now that I have pressed left click, I'll press left click again to confirm this operation. So now we have 4 loop cuts in our geometry. And if you look into the solid mode, it looks like a cylinder with a lot of loop cuts. Let's go back to our frontal view and in wireframe mode and see how we can make the shape of this cylinder match our champagne glass. So what we'll do here is we'll enable proportional editing. To enable proportional editing, so why do we want to enable proportional editing? So we want to enable proportional editing because if we try to edit this mesh just like this, then we'll have to go ahead and first scale down the top level face, then scale down the face next to that somewhere over there, then scale down the face next to that somewhere over here, and create the tapering pattern ourselves, right? We'll have to do something like this. But there's an easier way to do that. The easier way to do that is select the proportional editing on the top of your window, or you can also use the shortcut O. So if you press O, you will select the proportional editing, and then if you start scaling down your top face, you see that the other faces are also scaling down, but they're not like there's a fall off, right? They're not scaling down the same amount. So you can determine the strength of that fall off by moving the mouse button. If you scroll the mouse button, you can increase or reduce the strength of that fall off. So currently I want the base of my champagne glass to stay where it is. So I'll move the mouse so I'll scroll the mouse wheel such that the base is not affected. And also we are seeing that when we are scrolling it down, you can see the faces move up and down. They are scaling as well, but they're also moving up and down. So to stop that, what we can do is we can just press Shift Z, and now this faces are not moving up and down. They are just scaling on the XY plane. So if we do this, we see that it's sort of looking similar, but the champagne glass, the curvature of the champagne glass is very sharp near the end, while if we do this, the curvature isn't very sharp near the end of the wine glass of the champagne glass. So to fix that, we can adjust the kind of the fall off as well. So for our purposes, we'll have to use the spherical fall off rather than the smooth fall off. So once we select that and we scale it down, and we also press Shift Z, we scale it down until it matches the cylindrical portion. And you can see that we have very effectively created that tapering pattern that we wanted. Right? If you go to the solid view, we can see that we have that tapering pattern. Sorry. So let's go back to our front view. Let's move our object along the x-axis so that the cylindrical portion matches better with the with our reference. Let's zoom in and let's move it a little bit. Right. So that's much better, right? Is like, I think someone unmuted themselves. Do you have any question?
Actually, I have a doubt regarding the cursor part, 3D cursor. Like
Mm-hmm.
I have drawn that, but I couldn't move it.
I'm sorry. Could you explain more? You have drawn 3D cursor.
I have drawn the circle using the 3D cursor,
Okay.
but I cannot move that circle.
Okay. So like, you can't move the circle, is it? Can you? Okay. So let me.
I have drawn it at the glass,
Mm-hmm.
at the champagne glass, but I cannot move the cursor, the circle from there onto the axis.
So what mode are you in? Are you in object mode or edit mode?
I'm in object mode only.
Um,
Okay.
okay. So did you press the like movement shortcut G and then try to move it?
Yeah, now I can.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. So let's continue with the workshop. Right. So we have created this tapering pattern, and now we want to create the shaft of the wine glass, of the champagne glass. So let's go ahead and select um, our object, and let's tab into edit mode, and let's then extrude, and then let's select the top face. So to select the faces, what we do, to let's say if you want to select this entire loop, what you do is you press Alt, and then you press, and then you select any vertex of that loop, and in that way you can select the entire loop like that. So if there is any shortcut that you want me to explain that I have forgotten to explain, then you can ask me, and or you can also see over here. So when I click Alt and right, it selects the entire loop. So to select the top face, I just Alt and right click on the edge, on the loop edge, and the entire face gets selected. So once I've selected the entire face, I want to extrude it. I want to extrude it up till the cylindrical part of the champagne glass. So that looks good. Now I want to extrude. So in this part, I want to extrude it manually, and and then scale it, and then extrude it, and then scale it, so as to match the shape of the champagne glass. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's turn off proportional editing because we want to scale individual faces, and let's go ahead and model our champagne glass. So what I'm just doing is I'm extruding upwards. I'm confirming the extrude, and then I'm pressing S on the keyboard and scaling that face a little bit to match the shape of the champagne glass. So we'll have to be careful not to increase the amount of extrusion a lot. We'll have to keep it fairly uniform. Otherwise, you will see that the geometry is distributed non-uniformly, and that might cause problems later on. So let's go back into wireframe mode so we can see what we are doing better. All I'm doing is just extruding and scaling to match the shape of my champagne glass. So now let's zoom out and let's go back into solid mode and let's look at what we have created. So you can see that we have created a champagne glass, and we have the top as a complete face. So we'll need to fix that at some point. But for now, it looks pretty good, right? Let's go ahead and add a little bit of thickness to the base as well, so that our base isn't like infinitely sharp over here. So let's add a little bit of thickness over there. So let's tab back into edit mode, go back into wireframe mode, select the bottom face by alt clicking the edge loop, and then extrude it downwards just a tiny bit so that our base has a little bit of thickness. So now that we have this shape of glass somewhat ready, we can go ahead and let's now talk about something that we didn't talk about yesterday. We have to look into modifiers now. So you can see the shape of this glass is not very smooth, right? You can see the jagged edges. You can see that it's not a very smooth curve, right? You can make out the differences. Even if you make it, even if you shade it smooth, you can see that it's not very appealing to the eye. You can over here you can see the jagged edges if you pay close attention. So to fix that, what we can do, and you can also see some shading glitches at the top of the face where there is so if we go back to flat shading, you can see over here that we have a very sharp curve, so we'll have a shading glitch over here. You can see that, right? This part shouldn't be in shadow. Right. So to add more geometry, we want to add more geometry to our wine glass, make it smoother. How do we do that? We can do that by going into the properties panel on the right side and selecting the modifier properties option, modifier properties tab. While selecting our wine glass, first we have to select our wine glass, then we have to click on the modifier properties, and then we have to select add modifier. So once we select add modifier, we have this whole array of options of modifiers to add to our champagne glass. The modifier that we are going to use right now is called subdivision surface. So to add subdivision surface, we are just going to click on it, and you can immediately see that our wine glass, our champagne glass looks much smoother, and it has a lot more geometry now. So now if we go ahead and click on shade smooth, you can see that it looks much better now, right? You can see that there's a little bit of kink over here, right? The glass isn't as smooth as we would want it to be over here. So that is because our geometry is too close and we need to spread it out a little bit more. So let's go into front view and let's select this loop and move it a little bit down, and select this loop and move it a little bit up. So now if we go back to solid view, you can see that kink is not as visible anymore. So we have a much smoother geometry now. So I hope you were able to follow along up till now, or at least you were able to understand what I'm doing. If you have any doubts, please ask right now. Okay, so we'll move forward with our workshop. So now we want to get rid of the top face, and we want to make this look more like a glass. So let's go back into our front view and let's go back into wireframe mode. So let me explain a little bit more about the subdivision surface modifier. What it basically does is that it adds more geometry, and it smooths and it interpolates and smooths between the geometry that you already have. But if you don't apply the modifier yet, if you just add it to your object, then you can still edit your you can still edit your low resolution object while the uh, while the subdivision modifier is still on. So if you so when you tap back into edit mode, you still have your low resolution mesh to edit, and when you go back into object mode, you the subdivision modifier automatically um, like applies onto your low resolution mesh. So you can still edit your low resolution mesh is what the benefit of this modifier is. Because once I apply this modifier, I'll have a lot of geometry and it will be very difficult to deal with. So the benefit of this modifier is that I can still work with my low level geometry, my low resolution geometry, and see the effects of that with a high resolution mesh. I hope that makes sense. So let's go ahead and get rid of this top face. How do we do that? So first of all, we'll go back to solid mode, and we'll select the face selection mode. We'll toggle into the face selection mode by pressing 3, and we'll select the top face, and we'll press delete, and we'll select faces. So once we have gotten rid of the top face, it looks much more like a glass now. But if you pay close attention, you see that this glass is infinitely thin. It is just one face thick, which is not good. What I mean by that is, if we go into the gizmos tab over here, and we enable face orientation checkbox, we can see that so the blue regions are what we want to be facing the user, and the red regions are what we want to not face the user, to not face the camera or even the outside world. So we want to hide these red regions, because these are so the blue regions are the correct normals. So these faces should be pointing outward is what the blue color means, and the red color should not be seen anywhere. So how do we fix that? So let's go ahead and turn off face orientation. And to fix that, what we'll have to do is we'll have to go into the front view. We'll have to select, so go into the wireframe mode and select all these faces up till here. So up till you can, so to the point that you can see the inside of the champagne glass end, till there select all the faces and duplicate them by pressing Shift D. So now that I have duplicated them, they are logged onto my cursor, but I don't want to move them anywhere. So I'll just press right click to cancel to cancel the movement operation. But they are still duplicated, and the duplicated faces are selected right now. So to create the inside faces of this glass, we can scale this bit down a little bit. We can scale all these faces down a little bit, and we can connect. So when we go back to solid mode, we can see that there's a gap between the inside faces and the outside faces, and we'll have to fill that gap. But there's a better way to do this instead of scaling them down. So let's go back to wireframe mode and press Ctrl Z. So instead of scaling them down, what we can actually do is we can press Alt S, and that way when we move our faces, they are, instead of getting scaled down, they are getting moved along their normals. So this is a more ideal way to create the inside surface of any thin object. So once we press Alt S, we can move the faces inside a little bit, just to create a very thin surface. Can move them in a little bit. And now that we have created the inside faces for the glass, all we have to do is go back into toggle into edge select mode by pressing 2 on the keyboard. Press Alt select this edge loop. Just select this edge loop by pressing Alt and selecting the edge, and press Shift and Alt select the other edge loop. So these two edge loops, if you go back into solid mode, we want to merge these two edge loops, right? We want to merge them so that we have a ring around here so that we have connected geometry. So how do we do that? So to do that, we just bring up the search dialog box by pressing space anywhere on the screen, and then we select mm, what was it? Uh, hmm. So I think it was something like uh, yeah. So the name of the operation is bridge edge loops, right? So if you click on that, it will join those two edge loops and create faces very smartly along the edge loops. So once you have done that, you can see that our wine glass looks almost done. There's just one little thing to be fixed, is that there is a hole in our wine glass. So that we'll have to fix. But other than that, the top looks really good. And if you go back into solid mode and tap back into edit mode, you can see that the top of the wine glass looks pretty good. Now you can still see a little bit of a weird shading over here, and the reason for that is um, when we go into face orientation, you can see that these faces are still red. The reason for that is when we duplicated the inside faces, their orientation didn't change. So when we are connecting them up with the outside faces, they are the even though they have now become outside faces, they are flipped currently. So we need to flip all these faces around. So how do we do that? So Blender can easily do that by, if you just go back into edit mode, select all the faces, press spacebar, and select recalculate outside. Type recalculate outside and select that option. It will very smartly calculate the correct orientation of all those faces. So now if you switch back into solid mode, if you go back into object mode, and if you remove the face orientation option, you can see that our champagne glass looks has started to look pretty good. Now all that's left to do is to fix that hole inside, if is to fix that hole inside our champagne glass. So go ahead and tab into edit mode and select the edge loop that is causing the hole in the inside of the wine glass, and you can go ahead and extrude that edge downwards and try to match the shape of the inside of the wine glass and finish off that last bit of uh, the inside face. So you can still see that we have a hole inside the wine glass, but we can fix that just by pressing F and creating a face over there. So now we have our completed champagne glass, and um, if we go back into object mode, we can look at it in uh, like better shading without the distracting wireframe lines, and you can see that it looks pretty good. So now that we have created our champagne glass, let's go ahead and try to give it a little bit of shading, just so we can visualize what it will look like what will look like. So let's go ahead and delete our default cube, and let's add a plane where the where our 3D cursor was, and let's move that plane along the y-axis. Again, I'm going to move that plane to the x-axis. So our glass is now centered on top of the plane, and if we yeah, sorry about that. And if we look into the front view, we can see that our plane. So this is our plane. Yeah, this is our plane, and it's sitting a little bit on, like, it's clipping into the glass a little bit. So maybe we can move it down. Still clipping into it a little bit, so maybe we can move it down a little bit more. So now it's looking better, right? So if we go into rendered view, currently it's using EV, so we'll switch to cycles, and I'm going to use CPU as my rendering device. And with the lighting and camera setup that we have, it looks something like this for now, but we are going to change that. And let's head into the shading section. Let's hide our reference image. To hide your reference image, all you have to do is go into the hierarchy, press this button which says hide in viewport, and also press this button which says disable in renders. So that way you have hidden your reference image. Now we'll switch to rendered view to enable our cycles render, and we'll start modeling, and we'll start adding lights where we desire it, where we desire them to be. So instead of using this point light source, I'll want to use an area light source. So the reason for using an area light source is that it is more diffuse and looks much better on glass like objects which are cylindrical. So I just selected my light, went into the um, object data properties, and selected area. So now this is an area light. To point this area light at my champagne glass, all I have to do is click on this yellow handle and move it along so that it points at my glass. So I'm going to different views and making sure that it is pointing at my glass. Right. So now that it's an area light, will like instead of, so it's an area light, but it's still behaving like a point light. To increase the size of that area, we can go into the size X and size Y option, and can increase the size of that area light. So let's keep it to something like that. Increase the Y a lot, and maybe I want it to be a little bit more vertical. So right now I'm just like trying out different things and seeing what's looking better in my scene. So I like to keep it something like that. A very long area light. Maybe we can increase the X a little bit more. Something like that. So to increase the X, all I'm doing is like I'm clicking on the field and I'm dragging left and right. So yeah, that looks pretty good. So now we can go ahead and add shading to our glass. Before we do that, let's go back into the render properties and let's enable denoise. So once you enable denoise and click and make the start sample to something like 3, or let 3 should be good. And right, so once you do that, your renders will start getting denoised much earlier, and that will help you visualize the results much faster. So let's go ahead and select our glass and add a new shader. So once you have added a new shader, you'll see this pop up. We can reduce the size of the top section. We can look at it more clearly. We can look at it more clearly. So we want our glass to be made of glass, right? So instead of principled BSDF, we'll go ahead and select that. The same selection and movement shortcuts apply in this window as well. So we'll go ahead and select that, and we'll press delete to delete that shader. So now that we have deleted our shader, our glass is not responding to light anymore, so it's all black. So to fix that, we'll press Shift A, to open the add menu, we'll click on search and we'll add a glass BSDF. So you want a glass to be looking like it's made of glass. So we'll add a glass BSDF. We will click on the BSDF output of this node and we will connect it to the surface output of the material output. So once we do that, immediately you can see that our champagne glass has started to look a lot more like a glass, a lot more like it was made up of glass, right? So now it's looking a lot better. So we can go ahead and for the time being enlarge our plane a little bit, maybe make it this big, and we can add a shader to this as well. We can add a little bit of a black or a grayish color to this. So you can see that our champagne glass has started to resemble something that we want in our output. So now let's go ahead and make the liquid, the champagne inside the champagne glass. So to create the champagne, let's go back into solid view so that we can model without any lag. We go back into our front view and we bring back our reference image in the viewport. So we had hidden it from the viewport and we can bring it back just by clicking on this I button. So we have brought it back into the viewport. Now let's head into the wireframe mode and look at where we want the champagne to start from. So we want the champagne to start from here. So we'll select the closest, we'll go ahead and tab into edit mode and we'll select the closest inner edge loop at the edge loop of the inner faces. So it's not the edge loop from the outer faces, rather it's the edge loop from the inner faces. We'll select that edge loop and so let's so let's go into the top view and go into the solid view, and for the time being let's disable our modifier properties. Let's go into the modifier properties and disable our subdivision surface. So you can hide the effects of subdivision surface by going into the modifier properties and clicking on this button. So it hides your subdivision surface. So you can see that I have selected the inner edge loop, and now I want to select the edge loops until, so if you by mistake select any wrong edge loop, then just press Ctrl Z and keep selecting the edge loops until you hit the bottom. Right, so once you have selected those edge loops, if you go back into vertex select mode, you can see that we have all these faces selected as well along with the edges, and then we can go into the front view, go into wireframe view, and we can see that we have selected this portion of the inside faces of the champagne glass. Now to create the champagne inside the champagne glass, all we have to do is duplicate this inside the inside faces. So we have a duplicate of the inside faces logged onto our cursor right now, and I don't want to move them anywhere, so I'll just right click to cancel the movement operation. So now we have a duplicated set of faces of the inside faces of the champagne glass. But currently these faces are also a part of the champagne glass object. So how do we make it a different object from the champagne glass? To do that, while selecting, so once you have selected the duplicated set of faces, don't click away, otherwise it will deselect the duplicated set of faces. While they are selected, just press P on the keyboard, and this will bring up this small dialog box called separate. And you can separate by selection, by material, or by loose parts. So I want to separate it by selection because I have the duplicated set of faces selected right now. So I'll select selection. And now you can see that I have added another object in our hierarchy, which is shaded in red right now. And that has been separated from our champagne glass. So if I tap back into object mode and click on that new object, we can see that it's separate from the wine glass object. This is the wine glass, and this is the new object that we have created. So let's go back into wireframe mode. Let's go back into the front view, and in the new object that we have created, let's go into edit mode and select everything. Now we need to scale everything down. We need to move them along their normals just a slight bit, so that it lies separate from the, it doesn't lie touching the wine glass. We just want to separate them just a little bit. So once you do that, you will see that your the champagne liquid object is now not touching the wine glass anymore. So now you can go ahead and go into its edit mode and add the topmost face, and now you have the champagne liquid object as well. We can go ahead and enable the subdivision surface modifier for both the champagne liquid object and also the champagne glass. So now both of them look pretty smooth. But you'll see a problem over here, that our champagne liquid object has a weird shading on top. This is because we have this very sharp edge in our champagne, like in the liquid object. So to fix that, what we can do is we can go back into the front view, extrude the top face just a slight bit, scale it in just a little bit, extrude the top face again, and instead of moving it, this time we'll scale it down until we reach the center, and we can extrude it and scale it down again just to create another loop cut. We scale it down to a very small point, and then in fact we can go ahead, press S and press 0 on our keyboard to scale it down to a single point. So once it's scaled down to a single point, you can see that we have no weird shading in our champagne liquid object, right? There is no weird shading. So if we go ahead and look at the face orientation, you'll see that our champagne liquid object is again not oriented correctly. So to fix that, all you have to do is select the liquid object, go into edit mode, select everything, select all the vertices, and click on recalculate outside, and that will fix the orientation. So once we have done that, we can go ahead and deselect face orientation, and we have a champagne and the liquid inside it complete. So if we go back into rendered view, we can see that it currently looks a little bit like water, since we haven't added color to it, and also because it still has the index of refraction of glass. So we need to change that. So we need to select the we need to select the champagne liquid. We need to go into the shading tab, and we need to uh, right we need to give it a new material. So right now it has the same material as the glass, because if you select the liquid object, you see it has a material .001. If you select the glass object, it also has material .001. So they both have the same material. If I rename this material to glass material, and press enter to save that, if I select the champagne liquid again, it also has the glass material because we duplicated the faces, right? So we need to give it a different material. To give it a different material, I'll press this cross button, and now it it has no it has a default blender material applied to it. So we're going to add a new material to it. We'll call this material champagne, and we'll delete the principal BSDF shader, and we will add a glass BSDF. But instead of the index of refraction being 1.45, we'll have it as 1.33, because that's the index of refraction of water. So that will be close to the index of refraction of champagne as well. So we'll connect BSDF to surface, and we see it looks a lot more like water now. We can go ahead and change the color of our champagne to match the color of the reference photo better. So now we can see that our champagne matches the color of the reference much better. You can go ahead and make it a little bit darker. So yeah, this looks much more like what we have in our reference. So um, right. So did you guys have any problem following along up till now, or is there something that is not clear? Okay, I guess you guys don't have any doubts yet. So we can go ahead and um, we can start modeling this piece of like this cheese cover that we have over here. So let's go back into front view, and since we have done this before, I'm going to be a little more quick on it, so that we can finish our scene today. So let's place our cursor where it needs to be, and we add a circle. Let's make sure we are in object mode. So yeah, we are in object mode. Let's place our circle where we want it to be, add a circle, scale it down, match it to where it needs to be. So right now I'm just moving and matching where the circle needs to be. And now I'll go back into wireframe mode, tab into edit mode of that circle, and I'll start extruding and matching the shape of this circle to um, the object that we want to model. So right now the object isn't we can't follow the object along both the edges very accurately, so I'm just going to follow it along the left edge. So now I'm going to extrude it a little bit like that. So if I go back into solid mode and I bring this object along the y-axis forward and I hide my ground plane, you can see that we have something of this sort. Let's go back into front view and let's keep on modeling our object. Let's add this shaft. So we have added our shaft, and now we want to add a little glass sphere on top of it, right? So how do we do that? So we know that once we added our excuse me, once we added our, so let's go back to object mode and add a new circle just for demonstration purpose. Once we added our circle, in the bottom left in the add circle section, we had 32 vertices for our circle, right? So we can go ahead, I just deleted that circle. We can go ahead and add a UV sphere. It's like we already added a UV sphere in yesterday's workshop, so you should be familiar with this, right? So once we add a UV sphere, we see we have 32 segments for our UV sphere. So 32 segments means that there are 32 vertical lines in this UV sphere, which is perfect for merging it with our object over here. So instead of adding this UV sphere separately, I'll go into the edit mode of this object and then I'll add this UV sphere. So I just press Shift A and add a UV sphere, and now these two meshes are inside the same object, so I can merge them easily. So let's go back into front view, scale down the sphere, bring it up a little bit, bring it on the y-axis over here. So I'm just matching the position of the sphere with our object down here. So let's bring that sphere down. Let's scale it down a bit, bring it down. So this seems to be a good size for our sphere. So we'll go ahead and we'll select the bottom portion of the sphere and we'll delete it, and we'll delete all the vertices. Now we'll select the top portion, bring it down a bit. We'll select this edge loop and shift select the other edge loop. So I just press Shift Alt right to select the other edge loop, and we are going to use again the bridge edge loops feature of Blender. So it has bridged these two edge loops, and now we have something that looks like this, right? But again, we need to fix the issue of we need to fix the issue of face orientation. Currently you can see that the face orientation is very messed up in this object. So let's go ahead and select everything and recalculate the outside region. So that has fixed a lot of things, but we still need to fix the issue of the red popping out over here. So how do we do that? To do that, all we need to do is select, let's go back into front view, go into the wireframe mode. Then we need to select these edge loops. Let's select this edge loop and all the edge loops below that. So by selecting these edge loops, and we need to duplicate these edge loops just like we did for our champagne glass, and we need to scale them down a little bit by pressing Alt S and scaling them down. So once we have done that, all we need to do now is select this edge loop, select the inside edge loop, and bridge those edge loops. So if you go back into solid view, we can see that the orientation is messed up, but we can fix that by recalculating the outside again. And we see that we have mostly fixed everything except that there's a hole over here. So we can fix that by going into the front view, into the wireframe mode, extruding it a little bit, scaling it down a little bit, extruding a little bit, scaling it down, and then once we have a very small loop over here, we can just press F to finish that face, and we have fixed our object completely. So now all we need to do is to make it smooth, and for that we'll select the object, we'll go into the modifier properties and add a subdivision surface modifier, and right off the bat it looks much better. And if we go ahead and add a shade smooth to this object, it looks even better now. So if we go into the render view and we disable the face orientation, we see that this object is still diffuse, so we need to change the shading of this object to the glass material that we have. So we'll change it to the glass material, and see in the rendered view that it now looks like it is made of glass. So I had hidden the ground plane by pressing H on my keyboard, but you can also hide it from over here. So to unhide it, we just press the I button again, and our ground plane is visible again. So we move our cheese cover a little bit up so that it touches the ground plane, and instead of clipping into it, something like that. So you can see that our scene is taking shape, and all we need to do now is add those small cheese pieces inside our glass cover. So let's go ahead and do that. So since we are short on time, we'll just add a small cube. Let's go back into our layout view. Let's place our let's place our 3D cursor where it needs to be, and let's switch back to solid view so that we can perform this quickly. And by the way, I think this should be a good point to save our project, because sometimes Blender crashes and then you lose your progress. So let's save it. Right, so now I have saved my Blender file, and let's go back to solid view and let's add a cube. So right now this cube is too big. Let's scale it down, bring it up. Let's scale it down a little bit more, and let's scale it on the x-axis to make it look a little bit something like that. We can go into the edit mode, we can go into the edge select mode, and we can move the edges a little bit just so it looks a little bit ununiform. So once we have done that, we have a piece of cheese looking a little bit not very uniform, and then we can go ahead and add a modifier. So if we try to smooth it by adding a subdivision surface, it doesn't really work because there's very less geometry in this cube. So once we smooth it out, we just get something very incomprehensible. So instead of that, I'll delete it using this cross. Instead of that, I'll be adding a bevel modifier. What a bevel modifier does is it adds these chamfers to the edges of whatever you're adding the bevel modifier to. So once we add the bevel modifier, we can increase the amount a little bit to make the edges smoother, uh, and we can increase the segments a little bit to increase the resolution of that smooth edges. So let's go back into object mode. Let's select this. Let's select our cheese and let's shade smooth. And you can look at that. That looks much better now than just a plain cube. So if we go into the rendered view, you can see it looks white. We need to change that. So let's go into shading. Let's let's add a new material and call it cheese. And for the base color, we can either fine tune it the way we want it to look, or we can use this eyedropper tool and pick it up right from the reference image. So I picked a very light color. Maybe we should pick a little bit darker color, something like that, or something like that, right? So this looks much more like a piece of cheese now. Maybe we can fine tune the color a little bit more and then make it a little bit lighter. So this looks much more like a piece of cheese, but it still looks a little bit plasticky. To fix that, we'll have to add a little bit of subsurface, a subsurface scattering. What subsurface scattering is, that it, so when you like shine a torch through your fingers and your fingers light up red, that is when light is bouncing around inside your fingers and coming out the other side, picking up the color from the inside of your fingers. So that is what subsurface scattering is. So a lot of organic substances like plants and animals and like human skin and even cheese has this property. So we need to add it to make it a little bit more realistic. So once we have added that subsurface property, you'll see that when the noise clears up, it looks much better, and it looks much less plasticky. So let's go ahead and model the rest of the cheese pieces. We'll go back into solid mode. We'll clone this. Piece of cheese along the xy plane. We'll scale it down. Maybe we can rotate it 90 degrees in the y-axis, something like that. We'll keep it next to this cheese. And maybe we can duplicate this piece of cheese. We can rotate it 90 degrees and rotate it on the z-axis a little bit. Move this piece of cheese a little bit backwards, bring this piece of cheese a little bit forwards, something like that. So you see we have created our pieces of cheese, and we can select all of them, go into the wireframe view, go into the top view, move these along. So to go into the top view, I just pressed 7 on my numpad, or you can also like hold Alt and move your mouse button to the top, right? So move your mouse button to the down, and then you can move these pieces of cheese inside your glass cover, and it looks, and when you render it, it looks pretty good. So let's give it a little while to render. So you see it looks pretty good, right? Let's go back to solid view. and let's place our glass and our cheese pieces. Let's compose a shot now a little bit. Let's select the glass and also shift select the liquid inside and move it in the XY plane and place it somewhere over here. And select our let's select our um, let's select our pieces of cheese and the glass cover and move it along the XZ plane and place it somewhere over. Move it in the XY plane and place somewhere over there. So if now I go into rendered view, you can see it looks a little bit better, right? And then we can go ahead, we can switch back to solid view. Let me save my Blender file, and we can add a little bit of thickness to this ground plane. So when we render it, it looks something like this. So now we need to bring our camera. Now we need to bring our camera to the correct place so that we can create a render. So to do that, select your camera and let's go ahead and select a good place to a good I think we'll have a good render if we look at our scene from this angle, something like that. Yeah, that seems good. And we can go ahead and press Ctrl Alt and numpad 0 to bring our camera to this location. And so now I want my camera to be of square aspect ratio and also to be orthographic. So how do I do that? To make our camera square aspect ratio, we need to go into the output properties and we need to select the resolution. We need to set the resolution to be equal in both the X and Y direction. So let's set it to 1500 for now. Or you can set it to lower if you have like a slower PC and it will take you longer to render. So maybe you can set it to a lower resolution. But 1500 seems like a good number. Then we can go into the object data properties and while selecting the camera, go into the object data properties with this camera icon and instead of perspective, select orthographic as the type. So once you select orthographic, you see that your camera is now an orthographic camera and it does not like view perspective. So if you move your camera, so right now I'm just moving my camera to focus on the objects better, and I'm going to also move my ground plane a little bit so that it appears that my glass and my cheese are in the center of the ground plane. So now if I go ahead and hit render, like if I go ahead and view the rendered mode, it looks something like this, which is pretty good, but we still have a little bit dark sides on the front and on the side of the ground plane. We can also go ahead and add a little bit of bevel to the ground plane itself by using the bevel modifier, and we can reduce the amount and we can add a little bit more segments, and we can go ahead and select shade smooth. So now it looks a little bit better. So to fix the darkness issue, we'll have to add a little bit more light. So to do that, let's go back into solid view. Let's duplicate our light. Let's go into the top view by pressing 7 on the on my keyboard, and let's duplicate this light and bring it over here and rotate it around to face my scene. Let's duplicate this light again, bring it over here and rotate it around to face my scene. So currently I have uh, I have these lights. Yeah, I have 3 lights facing my scene from 3 angles. So this is called the 3-point lighting system, and you can read more about it in detail. Currently, due to lack of time, I'll not be able to explain it in a lot of detail. But the basic principle is there is a key light, which is our main light. There is a fill light. So the main light is generally coming from the direction of the camera. There is a fill light, which fills out the shadows that are caused due to the main light. And then there's a backlight, which highlights the edges of whatever you are lighting up. So let's go ahead and look at what our scene looks like right now. So right now it looks very well lit, but I would like to see a little bit of shadow. So I will reduce the strength of the fill light. Let's bring it down to something like 300. And let's also move my fill light a little bit backward, a little bit farther. So now it looks pretty good, and I just want to go back to solid view so that I can move my camera around easily. I saved my scene, and I want to reduce the size in Y and increase the size in X of the backlight. And let's see what it looks like right now. So it doesn't look very good because that backlight is showing through in like refracting and showing through in this glass. So I'll keep it. So I'll reduce it back uh, to a thin X and a large Y. So that looks much better. So let's go ahead and how much time do we have? We have only 5 minutes, right? So let's go ahead and configure our render settings, and we can then hit render and look at our final result. So let's go ahead and click on the render properties tab. In the viewport, in the max samples, we should reduce it from 1024 to, let's say, 16, because we don't like because currently it was running up till 1024 iterations, which is not required. And let's reduce the max samples for render from let's make it 64 for right now. And we're going to select denoise, and I think that should be it. If you're using CPU, then that should be pretty much it. So the last thing that we want to do is we need to go to the world properties, and we need to reduce the color of the background so it doesn't look very attention grabbing. So let's go ahead and render our image. Sorry. So you see, as we are getting more and more samples, the noise is reducing. Currently we have 56, 60 samples. Let's just wait until this render is complete. And there you have it. We have like created a very modern looking, a very sleek, a very aesthetic render of a champagne glass with champagne and some accompanying cheese for our blender workshop. Yeah, so that brings our blender workshop to an end. We can obviously go and add a lot more to it. We can go ahead and customize our ground plane to look more catchy, like we have in this render. So you might want to explore how you can do that, and you can also go ahead and add a few more things to this scene. For example, you can go ahead and model this champagne bottle, and you can add that to the scene. So yeah, there's a lot more you can do, and I encourage you to try these things. And uh, how to add text in a plane. Okay, so someone has asked how to add text in a plane. So to add text in a plane, there's if you go into the object mode, you can add Shift A, and in the add menu you'll see a text option. Let me share my screen. So if you press Shift A, in the add menu you'll see a text option, and if you select that, you can add text to your scene. So you can't really add it directly to a plane, but you can just move the text around and then it should be visible. And then to edit that text, just just tab into edit mode, and then you can edit your text. And then tab back into object mode, and there you have it. I hope that answers the question. Okay, so yeah, that brings our Blender workshop to an end. If you have any question, please let me know. I'll be sharing a shortcut cheat sheet with you, and that should be pretty helpful for remembering all the shortcuts until you memorize them. But other than that, if you have any doubts, then please let me know. And yeah, that's it. Thanks everyone for attending the workshop, and yeah, best of luck on your journey with Blender.
Can we discuss a little bit about the face orientation we are talking?
Okay, yeah, we can discuss about that. So let's say that you have let's bring up a UV sphere right now. Let's bring up a UV sphere over here. Right, let's move it up, move it along the y-axis, move it along the x-axis, bring it somewhere farther from our scene, and let's focus on it. Okay, so we have a UV sphere right now, and let's go into edit mode. Are you able to see my screen? Yeah. Let's go into edit mode, and let's delete the top few vertices of this sphere. So now we have something like a fishbowl, but you'll see that this sphere is now infinite. This fishbowl is infinitely thin, right? It's just made up of a single face. So a single face has the single face has a outward direction and an inward direction. So what a user should see, like what the camera should see, is only the outward direction. So even my plane is messed up a little bit. I will need to recalculate its normals, recalculate outside, and now it looks better. So what I mean to say is each face has an outward direction and an inward direction, and the camera should only see the outward direction of the face. It should not see any of these red regions. So to fix that, if you want to make a fishbowl, for example, to fix that, what we can do is we can select all these faces, we can duplicate them, we can scale it inward. So once we have scaled it inward, you see now there are two layers, right? And we can connect these two layers. We can connect these two layers. I think I selected the wrong edge loop. Let me go into the front view, select these two layers, and then we can bridge edge loops. And once we have done that, you can see that we have two layers in this fishbowl now, an outer layer and this inside layer, which is also like facing the outside. So now this fishbowl has thickness, right? And we can recalculate the outside. Okay, something is not right. Oh, I didn't select it completely. So we can recalculate the outside, and you can see that all these faces that are blue, they are facing towards the outside of the fishbowl, and the red regions are only facing on the inside of the fishbowl that there is no way for the camera to see. So does that make sense?
So will it mess things up if the camera sees the red region?
Could you repeat your question? It was not very clear.
Will it mess things up if the camera sees the red region?
Oh, so if it messes things up, if the okay, so let me give you an example. Let's go ahead and focus on our sphere, and let's give it the glass material, right? Let's add over here somewhere, let's add a light source, let's add a point light source, and let's add a ground plane. So now if we render it, you see that our fishbowl looks something like this, right? Let's bring our light source closer. So our fishbowl looks something like this, right? Which is pretty correct. We need to shade it smooth, right? Which is pretty correct, except that wait, I think we also need to add a little bit of a subdivision surface modifier, and yeah, so it looks pretty correct, right? You can see the plane behind the sphere, and it doesn't look like it's made up of it's like a glass ball. It doesn't look like a glass ball. It looks hollow inside, right? But if I remove the inside layer, let's go to solid view. Let's hide this. Let's select these edge loops. Yep, let's bring back that plane, and let's move that plane a little bit down. So if I remove this inside layer, you see that the refractions are not rendered properly. You can see that there is a weird refraction on the top. There's a weird refraction on the top, and there is no proper refraction because it's infinitely thin, right? There should be a little bit of refraction. And if you look at Yeah, so basically it messes up with the shading of the uh, basically the shading of the ray tracer. So that's why we need to take proper care that only the outside faces are visible, like only the blue regions are visible to the camera. And not just the camera, only the blue region should be visible to the outside, like even if we view from any angle, only the blue region should be visible. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so are there any other questions? If not, then let's conclude this blender workshop. And yeah. Okay, thanks for participating in this blender workshop, and best of luck.